Welcome back to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Geary. In this episode, host Josephine Green Zhang talks with queer and challenger screenwriter Justin Kuritzkes about collaborating with director Luca Guadagnino, the challenges of adaptation, and much more. Listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. And now, here's Josephine.
Hi, this is Josephine Green Zhang. We are with the Third and Fairfax podcast today. This is my first time in the studio, and I'm so lucky to be with screenwriter, playwright, and novelist Justin Kuritzkes.
Hi.
Justin is recently out with a new film with Luca Guadagnino, with this new film, Queer. And do you want to talk a little bit about what Queer is about? Give the general log line. I would too, but I'm gonna ruin it in the moment if I don't.
Queer is an adaptation of a book by William S. Burroughs that he had written in the 1950s, but that wasn't released until the 1980s. And it's the story of William Lee, who's an American expat living in Mexico City, and Eugene Allerton, who's another American expat living in Mexico City. And it's ultimately this very complicated love story between the two of these very complicated people. That's the movie. Yeah.
I just saw it this week, and it's a beautiful film. Such a unique structure, and just like powerful, passionate love story. Before we get into what it was like to write this story in particular, I like to start with our guests here, asking how did you become a storyteller? What made you want it? Where are you from? Like, what made you get into screenwriting and storytelling in general?
Yeah, well, I'm from LA. I grew up in the Valley, and then my dad moved to Santa Clarita, and my mom moved all around the West Side. So I've lived in a lot of parts of Los Angeles. But then I've been in New York for the past 12 years or so, and I really moved to New York to be a playwright. And that was something that I started doing in high school here. I started writing one-act plays and having my friends perform them and direct them, and so that's really where the storytelling started for me, was in theater. But before I even was aware that theater was something you could do, I was already somebody who really loved movies. Movies were really my first love. It just took me a while to actually write one. But yeah, I spent about 10 years writing plays, and then wrote novels, and finally, a couple years ago, wrote what became my first screenplay.
Challengers. So I'm such a fan of Challengers. I actually went as Tashi for Halloween. No. Yes.
Did you have friends go as the other characters?
I had my husband go as sort of like a mashup, because because off Etsy I bought the gray T-shirt. Yeah. So
good.
It's hot in here. Okay. But it was funny because I brought a racket, so I went to go see. I went to go see Suspiria, the original, at the Orpheum.
Okay, cool.
And there were at least like 7 other couples, and like some people as trios. Yeah. But I brought a tennis racket, and they made me check it.
Yeah, it's a weapon.
Yeah, it's a weapon. Well, somebody had a scythe, or like a cross scythe. It wasn't So I was like, how did they get in? But I had a tennis racket. Yeah. Anyways, but there were at least 7. So, that just says to the population.
Well, I'm really touched and honored by that. That's so cool.
Which high school did you go to?
I went to Harvard Westlake.
Oh, okay.
In North Hollywood. Must
have been a really competitive space, I imagine. I'm from Arcadia, Pasadena area. Okay.
It was I guess what was interesting about that experience was that in relation to like eventually making movies is that, my parents are pretty square, which I say lovingly. They're like doctors and lawyers, and that's most of the family. But being at that school, I was surrounded by a lot of people whose parents were in the industry. And so it wasn't like this foreign thing to me,
To become a writer, to get the film business.
Yeah, I just knew that like films were made by people who sent their kids to school and went and bought groceries, and that was like,
Yeah.
there were real people who made movies.
Yeah. And is that part of what made you want to get away to New York, as a little bit of getting away from the business a little bit?
A little bit. Yeah.
So what were some of your great artistic influences, like when, that you say, like, into your plays and into challengers? And I like to do this broad map before we get into
I love that.
queer.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of my sort of early influences and the people who really taught me how to write through their writing are playwrights. So people like Edward Albee or Wally Shawn or Carol Churchill or Maria Fornes, these sort of great experimental theater writers were the people who really got me excited about writing and dramatic storytelling. And then at the same time, I was really becoming a sort of cinephile in high school and falling in love with the French New Wave and watching movies by Stanley Kubrick. And, I think the first screenplay I ever read was Reservoir Dogs, because I was like 12 or 13 and someone had showed me Pulp Fiction and it like blew my mind, at that point the movie was 10 years old or something, but it still felt like completely fresh. And I was obsessed. And, but I couldn't go rent Reservoir Dogs because I was 13.
Oh,
But this was the early days of the internet. So you could just look up online and see where, so I just found the script online and read it. So I actually read the script for Reservoir Dogs before I saw the movie.
Yeah. Oh, like Drew's Scriptorama or something.
Yeah, something
like
like that. It probably wasn't even the real script. It was probably like a transcript.
Yeah. You find those. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I also noticed that, like, I had a chance to read Queer, and if I'm being honest, I also brought your novel Famous People, which I happened to get a copy of.
This is great.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I feel like you really, in your descriptions in Queer and in Famous People, there's really a strong like voice point of view, and you're not like even in the descriptions like afraid to write from a point of view or hear yourself. So where am I going with this? Just like, can you talk about what inspired you to first write a novel, and like if a lot of your like what are some of the themes from plays to novels to challengers to queer?
I think it's so the thing about novels and plays is that they usually come from a place of language, or like you said, a voice. So the way that I started writing that novel was, I thought it was a monologue. I thought it was going to be a play, and I just had this character start talking, and then I got 60 pages into it or something because I liked the way that his voice sounded, and I liked the guy, but I realized that nothing had like happened. There was no story happening yet, and 60 pages has gone by. And if that's a play, that's like 3 hours already. So I knew, okay, this isn't a play. Maybe it's a novel, and so that's how that happened. But movies come from a really different place. Movies always present themselves to me first visually. So, for example, Challengers, it wasn't about how they sounded or the way that they expressed themselves with words. It was this like image of these three people on a tennis court arranged in this geometry, and that was the thing that made me excited about wanting to write that movie. And then the voice came later.
Well, it's interesting because with Famous People, which is about a kind of a pop star, I would say it's like, I'm going to assume it's a little like Justin Bieber as like a voice, but threaded throughout. I'd even see in Famous People, I'd see in Challengers, and even in Queer, which is set in the 1950s, like a little bit of, there's a pop influence throughout all of them. That, I don't know, it's kind of maybe it's not something necessarily deliberate that you do, but there's something very like, even with, I know this is adding on direction, but there's even like, anachronistic music in queer.
Yeah.
There's like that thread of that throughout all the pieces. And yeah, I'm just curious, like, is that something deliberate you do, or is it just something kind of like do you make a playlist as you're creating each of the different stories?
No, I usually don't. Like, when it comes to music, I usually don't write that kind of stuff into the script unless it's diegetic, unless it's like on a jukebox or something. But I think the thread of what you're talking about is that I've always been drawn to stories that are about the behind the scenes of something, like somebody who has a public facing persona and then the thing that's behind that nobody gets to see. And I think why I'm drawn to a story like Famous People or like Challengers, which is about these athletes who are, athletes are performers. And I think it's because it's a sort of exaggerated version of something we're all dealing with all the time, which is that we have this person that we project to the world, and then we have this private self that no matter how open you are with anybody, that's always something that can only be known by you, and in the case of queer, so much of that became about the persona that Burroughs built for himself and projected into the world. Something that we've all been thinking about a lot throughout the process of making the movie, and then throughout the process of now talking about the movie and watching it get out into the world, is that all of us who made Queer came into that project with a sort of notion of who Burroughs was, which was built on this guy he had cultivated in popular culture, which is this kind of gruff, almost macho, kind of austere, like cool writer. And then when you read Queer, it's really surprising to find that there's this character who's his alter ego, William Lee, who's very embarrassing and like tender and sweet and doesn't know how to say the right thing and sometimes can't control what his face is doing, even though he really wants to seem like dignified. He can't help but, embarrass himself. And all of a sudden, that guy felt like somebody I could connect with, and somebody I could write for, because that felt like somebody I could reach out and touch. Whereas the austere Burroughs persona felt like, even though I was really seduced by it, and I think a lot of people are, especially when they're teenagers, which is why every teenager loves Naked Lunch, and gets obsessed with the Beats and Burroughs and these like cool writer guys,
Yeah.
But behind that, in Queer, I found this really sweet man, which doesn't mean he's not a complete asshole sometimes too. He's a really rough character in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I found a lot of tenderness there, and I found a lot of, I just found myself really feeling for him.
Can you talk about how this project came about, like how you and Luca decided to work on this, and like what was this going from this to Challengers like for you?
Well, so we went from Challengers to this.
Yes.
And
yes.
so it was.
I meant from Challengers to this.
I had written Challengers on spec, and really just like for me, like I had just written that movie because it was an idea that got planted in my head. And that I couldn't shake, and I just wrote it because it was this movie I wanted to watch, without any real idea of like who was going to make it with me or whether it was going to get made or anything. And then I found myself in this amazing position of all of a sudden, really quickly after I had written the first draft, being in pre-production with Luca and Amy Pascal and Rachel O'Connor and Zendaya and Josh and Mike, and Luca and I really had to become like comrades really quickly. We were like in the trenches together really quickly. And we realized that we could do it because we spoke the same language. We were like very much in sync creatively, but also just, it's that thing where you meet somebody and you realize like, this is one of my people, and so we were in the middle of doing that. And Luca just handed me the book, Queer by William S. Burroughs one day and said, read this tonight and tell me if you'll write it for me. And so I read it that night and I immediately said yes, even though at that point I had no idea how I was going to approach it. Mm-hmm. But I just, the idea of this legendary book by this legendary author, but more importantly, knowing that it was a movie that was important to Luca, that he had been wanting to make since he read the book as a teenager. I knew that if there was any way that I could make that happen quicker, if there was any way that I could bring that movie into existence with him, that was something I just had to do.
Definitely. Did you, so I've known that Queer is considered a sequel a little bit to Junkie.
Yeah.
Did you also read Junkie and you had what was the research process in like reading all of Burroughs' books and like going through and maybe taking excerpts from his real life? Like how did you go through the different research of his life versus like the book Queer, and how did you pick and choose from what you were going to adapt and find the structure eventually?
Yeah. I mean, it's a sort of like chaotic process, as all research always is. And then you kind of like, without planning, stuff sticks around and some stuff doesn't, With Queer, I had read some of Burroughs, more well-known books. But
Naked Lunch.
Yeah, Naked Lunch, some of the Ahe letters, but I hadn't read Queer. And so I went back and read Junkie. I reread Naked Lunch. I watched a lot of interviews with Burroughs. I read a lot of scholarship on Burroughs, like from people like Oliver Harris, who ended up being a consultant for the movie, or just somebody we talked to a lot as we were in prep. We had an amazing researcher, Ben Panzeca, who did a lot of research about Burroughs' life and also the period and, Mexico City at that time. And then, I had to do a lot of research into this event that was really fundamental to Burroughs's writing, and especially the writing of Queer, which is the shooting death of his wife.
Yeah.
He sort of would talk about it as this moment that haunted the writing of Queer, and that ultimately kind of haunted his whole life, as it would.
Yeah, I've heard that the shooting of his wife. He had also said that was what really started his career as a writer in some ways, even though he had written before, but it was like that had changed and haunted. And it's interesting in Queer how it's not like there's the fictional character of Eugene,
right?
That, what are your theories? Is a stand-in for his wife, or
Well, yeah, it was important to Luca and I, as we were talking about what the movie could be and how we wanted to honor the book and also depart from the book, that we were always building a portrait of a character, this character, William Lee, who, even if he was a stand-in for Burroughs in some sense, he wasn't Burroughs, otherwise Burroughs would have called him William S. Burroughs.
Yeah.
And so there was this balance to be struck between bringing in the parts of Burroughs' biography and the parts of his other work that would inform that character and, give a fuller picture of who this person, William Lee, is and what he represents, without ever making it feel like we were doing the William S. Burroughs biopic, because that wasn't something that was interesting to either of us. I think there probably is an interesting movie to be made that's the William S. Burroughs biopic, but this isn't it,
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of use of metaphor and motif and magical realism. I think inspired by also Burroughs' own beliefs in telepathy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Tilapia.
The more you tilapia fish. Yeah. So I'm just curious, how did you find those with Luca visual motifs, and also because I read the script as well, and a lot of that is in the script.
Yeah.
Just curious, what it when I'm talking about the structure too, because I feel like you have a very clear 3 acts.
Yeah.
And then in the movie, there are chapters,
right.
Visually too, and I feel like even though they're not denoted in the script, you can feel that they're still there.
Right.
So how did you like come about with that structure that's very like grounded in the beginning, and then sort of gets into the surreal as you get to the end? Yeah.
Well, the surrealism is threaded throughout the book. It's kind of always this like hum, this like background radiation of the book throughout the whole thing. But one of the earliest conversations we had about how we wanted to depart from the main text of Queer was that in the book, they, at the end, they get to Dr. Cotter's hut in the jungle. And, this whole time they've been searching for Yahe, this drug that Lee hopes will allow them to communicate telepathically.
Yes.
And they get to the jungle in the book, and for a moment it seems like they're going to get the Yahe, and then that is quickly shut down, and they descend back to civilization, not having gotten what they came for. And as we were talking about how we wanted to expand from that, one of the first things we decided was that it would be interesting if they actually got it. That if you think about the book as kind of opening a door and then quickly closing it, we wanted to see what would happen if you opened the door and stepped through to the other side, and how they would both internalize that and how that would affect their dynamic, whether they would react the same way. So before I even started writing the earlier parts of the movie, which were more or less faithful to the book, I knew that we were going to go there. So that informed the whole process of writing those earlier scenes. And then when it came to that actual sequence where they get the Yahe and they go on this trip, that was just, that came out of a lot of research on my part of ayahuasca trips and, reading testimony, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts where people would talk about their experience. I watched one documentary where it was like a neuroscientist, and he volunteered to do ayahuasca and have his like lab partner, interview him while he was tripping.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that. But then on the visual level, it was really just a matter of something that was present throughout the whole writing of the movie, which was that because I knew I was writing it for Luca the whole time, I was just kind of selfishly writing scenes that I was excited to watch him direct. So that, I just wrote crazy stuff and kind of knew that like he was going to be game for it. And that's a very like rare and exciting situation to be in as a screenwriter.
Yeah. I mean, you have such a close collaboration, and knowing the director's on board with you during the process, like how does that change, from going from writing something on spec to writing something with the director? Like, are you showing him pages as you're going? Oh, I have the first act or scene by scene, and you want to include that, or are you kind of more keeping it private to yourself and then showing him when you feel like it's ready? Like, what's that?
It's a bit of a mixture. I mean, for the most part, something I really love about Luca is that while he's got a very clear vision and very clear ideas about what excites him cinematically, he's also like just an intensely generous collaborator, not just with me, but with everybody who, he works with, which is why they keep working with him. It's why like he makes 10 movies with the same people, because he kind of leaves people to go do their work and then show up having had their own artistic process. So that was, for the most part, how Queer worked for me. We had this period of me reading the book and us talking a lot about it and talking about the possibility of it. And then I kind of went off and wrote it. But because we were on set together for Challengers, every once in a while I would write something that I was really excited about, or that I thought would get a rise out of him, or that I was like kind of excited to see how he would react. And I would just slip him the pages and, show him on set.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you were writing it. You were writing it while you were on set of.
I started writing it while I was on set.
As soon as you got the book, you kind of started.
Yeah, I got the book. We talked for a while. I was thinking about it, and then I started writing it. on set.
Yeah.
And kind of finished it like in the weeks right after we wrapped Challengers.
Okay. So how many weeks did it take you to write a first draft?
Well, he gave me the book in May, and I gave him the first draft in July or June. Yeah, July. Yeah. So
yeah,
pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, this was such a, like, I love the performances in this film. Like, Drew Starkey is such a star.
He's so fantastic.
Fantastic. I'm like gonna go back and watch Outer Banks now more because I'm a super fan now. He's like our next Brad Pitt. Like, I just feel like he is. So, you know, infused throughout this, there's so much desire.
Yeah.
You know, desire is such a strong theme, and it's what Luca does well, and you as well. And and there's just, okay, how do I like I'm like blushing. I like but just that, okay, how do you write such good sex scenes? Like, what's the anatomy of writing a sex scene? Like, and how do you address that? And from a different lens, you know, like putting yourself in the past, and like also as a, you know, I don't know if you're queer or not, but like I know you're married to also a writer and director. So like, how do you do that? Do you feel like outside of yourself, and what's that experience like for you?
Well, I think it's important first of all, I'm very flattered by that. That's very sweet of you to say that I write good sex scenes. I'm really touched by that. Because there's a lot of trepidation approaching writing an intimate scene, because it's you can feel a little sensationalist or like voyeuristic, or there's a lot of potential traps you can fall into. And I think it was really important to me for both Challengers and Queer that any intimate scenes are dramatically necessary, that there's something being revealed about character, you know, that there's something at stake for people. Otherwise, it starts to feel like a 80s action movie where it's just like a montage that does nothing dramatically, that's just there.
The jazz music comes in,
exactly.
And it's like the saxophone, and
which is like both embarrassing to watch, but also just like dramatically dead. So what's the point? And for me, you know, with both, let's say the scene in the hotel room in Challengers, or some of the scenes where Daniel and Drew are intimate with each other in Queer, the movie is happening there. You know, it's really important that the characters are after something in those scenes, that how they're going about what they're doing is telling you something about where they're at emotionally and psychologically, you know, because then that scene is a completely legitimate part of a dramatic story, you know, and there's no reason to avoid scenes like that other than prudishness, you know. So I think as long as you see intimacy as a very banal part of human life and the human experience, there's no reason to approach it any differently than you would approach any kind of dramatic action, you know. So that's really the like guiding principle of it. When it comes to the specifics of the love between Lee and Allerton, I had the book to lean on to some extent, but beyond that, you know, the specific circumstances of these two characters' lives are very much in a time and a place and a world that no longer exists. So there was no way, no matter who I am, there's no way I could have full access to that. So I have to connect with the part of it that's universal, and the part of it that feels like as long as you've loved anybody, or as long as you've been intimate with anybody, you can understand what's going on in those scenes. So, you know, which is just what you have to do as a writer always. And
in exploring Allerton, I thought you did, I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't read Queer. I tried to cram it this week before
That's all right.
before reading it, and I was like, okay, either I'm gonna watch just read famous people or watch some of your YouTubes or read Queer, watch Queer or read the script.
Yeah.
So I had to pick my
Thank you.
good poison. But so about Allerton, like what like he do you think he's queer at the end? Like do you think what do you feel like, because he rejects him so much and sometimes it feels like it's just a matter of like convenience and being with him, like his travel companion, and then you have this cut to 2 years later and like he's essentially gone, or imaginate like part of his imagination. So I'm just curious, like, he pushes him to the ground at one point. So like, what do you, and he says, I'm not queer.
Right.
So, and is that just a denial, or, maybe just as a fan, I'm curious to.
No. Well, that moment where he says, I'm not queer, I'm disembodied.
Yes.
It's an echo of something that Lee says.
Yes, it does.
And in the book, Allerton doesn't say that. That was just, it's a thing that Lee says during a sort of dream in the book.
Yes.
Which I think is also how it is in the movie when the first time that phrase comes up.
Yes.
And when I read that in Burroughs' book, it kind of like knocked me to the floor. There was something about that phrase that just felt so profound, and I couldn't even really explain it, and I probably can't explain it now, but I knew that the key to what's going on with these guys is in there somewhere. This, I'm not queer, I'm disembodied. And I think something Luca has been saying about the movie that I'll steal because I think it's really beautiful is that there's a temptation to think of this as a story of unrequited love, and that's actually not the case. It's a story of unsynchronized love. So it's about these two characters who are constantly trying to get in sync with each other, and they can't. And then sometimes they do, and then they're faced with this horror of getting what you want, this horror of like actual communication on the level of intuition. And that's what's so arresting to me about the ayahuasca sequence, the way that Luca has put that together and the way that Daniel and Drew work through that, is that it's this complete opening of a channel between two people on this level that most of us can't even dream of, and that we all think we want. And that maybe maybe there are two people for whom that kind of open communication will make them feel even closer, or will be uncomplicated. But for these two, it's not that simple, So yeah, that's why afterwards there's this retreat from Allerton.
It's that intimacy can be so scary.
It's terrifying.
Terrifying at that
course.
level. Yeah. And it's interesting because it's even at that time, like such a, like being queer and hiding, it's just, that's also very scary, and they're at different points in their lives of what being queer might mean to them. So,
well, yeah, the character Lee is a criminal for two reasons, right? He's on the run, essentially. And he's on the run because he's a heroin addict and because he's queer. And he's found this pocket of Mexico City where there's this group of expats where it's kind of, it's not that much of an issue, they have to live in a particular way in order to make it work. But he's found a community where he can kind of be himself in Mexico City. But Allerton has not arrived at even that level of self-knowledge, And I don't know that the book, and certainly I don't think the movie is particularly interested in Allerton's identity as a thing you can point to, or a thing you can name and go, Allerton is this and this and this, I think to a large extent, that's kind of what the movie's about, the inadequacy of that. That's what that phrase, I'm not queer, I'm disembodied, that's part of what that means to me. It's the inadequacy of these boxes.
These identities that we're forced into.
Yeah.
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 I feel like when I heard the term "I'm disembodied" in the movie both times, it felt like also being put in this box dehumanized you. So for me, it felt like that especially with the images of only like the torso being shown, that it felt like disembodied and also like dehumanized by what society has made you, an outcast.
Totally.
And I'm just curious, like, was there any research you did about like what it was at the time to live in Mexico in that time period? And
yes, of course. Though it's also like I was always conscious of the fact that I wasn't making a movie that was set in a actual Mexico City that ever actually existed, right? Because it's a Mexico City that exists in Burroughs' mind and exists in Burroughs' creation. There are bars in this book that he says are in Mexico City that if you read some of the scholarship, you learn are actually based on bars he like went to in Germany, or in Austria, or, bars back in St. Louis or New York. So it's this kind of weird amalgamation of all these different experiences Burroughs has had that he then sets in this dream Mexico City, So that's why even when, I had first written the script and we were talking about how Luca was going to do it, we kind of quickly moved past the idea of like going to Mexico and shooting on location and trying to find places that still looked like the 1950s. First, because that doesn't exist anymore. Mexico City today doesn't look like it used to. And when you watch like newsreel footage or photos, it's like shocking to see what Mexico City used to look like. It's like the colors are incredible. The colors of the cars, the buildings. It's a completely different image of what you have today. But we knew that to try to recreate a historical place was the wrong approach. That it was actually this thing that Burroughs had constructed completely, and so that we would have to construct completely, which is why Luca shot the whole movie at Cinecittà in Rome.
Also, that it's a place in the fictional character William Lee's mind.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to just go through. Okay, one last question, and then a rapid round.
Great.
Okay, so when do you feel? Okay, I'll just say. I got it. What were the biggest challenges, and what are you most proud of?
With queer specifically? Or?
With queer specifically, yeah.
Well, the biggest challenge, I think, was there's so much, I think I felt like this big weight on my shoulders when I started writing the script, which was, first of all, doing justice to Burroughs' work, because he doesn't get adapted very often. And because this is like a monumental piece of literature, piece of American literature. So feeling the weight of that. And then also feeling the weight of knowing that this was a movie that mattered so much to Luca, and wanting to make sure that I gave him a script that felt like it lived up to the movie he had been dreaming about, or at least that it made it possible for him to start to put the pieces together of getting there, So that was a lot of responsibility that I had to like ignore to even write, I had to kind of push that to the side to even write. And a big part of that was that so much of the book and so much of what gives the texture of Burroughs' voice is the voice of his narration, the voice of his actual writing, which is so like rich and incredible, and finding a way to externalize that into something that was like, because a screenplay is always two things. It's always something that you're supposed to find meaningful and exciting when you read it, but it's also this like really practical document that you're going to give to hundreds of people to have them like start to do their jobs. And so translating the richness of Burroughs into this document that like people could figure out how to light, and like that people would know where the trucks have to park, like all of that. That was a challenge, but an exciting one, and it honestly taught me a lot about screenwriting. Doing that, it was very much like it's the first time I'd ever adapted anything, and I think I had a lot of notions about what adaptation was like, or what would make adaptation easier than writing something original. And I really quickly found out that like in so many ways it's a lot harder, and in so many ways you have to do more writing and more work than you do when you're writing something original. So that was tough. And that's also probably the thing I'm most proud of, is that mixture. Yeah.
I recently heard a talk. The showrunner of Pachinko has said that what she'll do when she does an adaptation, she actually just does it in Kindle now, and she'll highlight everything and then just look at what she highlighted, because it's like a pre-edit. I just thought that was like a really practical, cool tip. Is just like if you're reading a book, just to like look at what you in your like
what you just naturally
what you just naturally highlighted and liked and edited yourself, and then you go back and look at it and you're like, okay, there's something there at those highlights.
I think that's really real. I mean, I think your first job when you're adapting something, especially if it's something that is a book you really love, which was the case with Queer, your first job is to be a good reader. You kind of have to treat yourself like a student of this book. And so, it's a lot of like, it's a lot of seeing what you already love about the thing,
and being true to source.
Being true to it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to make a hard right to Rapid Round.
Great.
1, what's your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
Favorite snack in a movie theater?
Popcorn.
Standing desk or sitting desk?
Sometimes couch. Yeah. Often couch.
Okay, my favorite form of exercise, because we sit so much as writers.
I walk a lot around New York.
Oh, is that, I should add this one too. Like, where do you have your aha moments? In the shower, walking, dishes?
All over the place. I have, you don't get to plan when aha moments happen. So you should be prepared at all times for an aha moment.
Okay. Are you a pantser or a plotter? Meaning like, do you, it's that thing where you just like write by the seat of your pants without an outline, or do you really meticulously plot out?
I don't really meticulously plot out, but it's a little chaotic. I take notes in a bunch of different places, and then I kind of start writing when I feel like I can't put it off any longer. So there's no there's no system, but there is a feeling like, okay, I've gathered enough wood. I can build a fire now.
Somewhat organized chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you use voice memos? Are you a voice memo person?
No. Well, that's not. No, I don't. Not really. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite book of all time?
That's so hard.
We can skip.
No. Probably the first book I read where I was like, I became obsessed with the voice of an author, and I went, wow, there's so much possibility in writing, was Breakfast of Champions.
Favorite author?
Let's say Kurt Vonnegut.
Favorite play?
Oof. That's so hard. My favorite play. Oh my God. Let's just say The Lady from Dubuque.
Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite movie?
Barry Lyndon.
Show?
Breaking Bad.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. That was it. That was
that was the most. I was having such a nice time, and that was the most stressful.
I know. I feel like I always want to change my letterbox 4, but I feel like you know.
I did it. They made me do it the other day.
Oh, did they? What did you say?
I said Barry Lyndon. I said The Vanishing. I said The Ascent, and I said Strange Days. Yeah,
that's good.
Those are my 4.
Those are mine. Always has election in it.
Election's really good.
Y tu mama tambien.
Yeah.
Now I am Parasite is one of mine.
Great.
I can't think of the 4th one now. Sunset Boulevard.
I mean, that's a fantastic 4 favorites.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was all boiling down to this. This is what the whole interview was really about.
Yeah.
Justin, it's been such a pleasure to have you here on Third and Fairfax podcast. I can't wait for the world to see Queer. When does it come out?
It comes out November 27th in New York and LA.
In New York.
Yeah.
It's awesome. We can't wait for this movie to come out and your next collaboration, your next film after that too, which I'm sure you have a long, bright future in front of you.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Justin.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Third and Fairfax. You can listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, and Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. If you like this episode or have a comment, email us at podcast@wga.org. Also check out writtenby.com, the Guild's online publication, for more on writer craft, career, and union life. And see you next time.